Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Jim Ostrowski with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Welcome you to our webinar this evening, Permitting Considerations for Recovery Projects After the Mid-Michigan Floods. So this is kind of like a part 2 of last week's webinar we held. Again, my name is Jim Ostrowski. I'll be your moderator for tonight. And I'm going to go through our lineup of other presenters in just a moment. Before I do that, basic housekeeping guidelines for a lot of you who never joined us before. A few things to know. First of all, as you can tell, all lines are muted. It means that you can hear us, but we can't hear you. If you have a question tonight, you can type it into the question box on your GoToWebinar toolbar. That looks just like this. You'll see a question drop that down, type your question in, and we'll get it. And we're going to go through questions at the end of the webinar, the presentations. We are recording the webinar and we're going to post it as soon as we can. Everyone who registered will get a link to it as soon as it's available. Also, if you look under your handouts tab on your toolbar, so if you look, there's, oh, I don't have one in that picture, but in your handouts tab, there are, I think, 4 documents in there. There's the presentations, a couple of the presentation slides, as well as a flyer that Dan Schulman's going to bring up, as well as a contact list that has got important contacts for the various counties, Eagle and FEMA, that you might want to have access to. Tonight's agenda, this is what the lineup looks like. We're going to have an overview, Eagle Permitting Programs overview by Brian Rudolph and Eagle. Also, Joy Brooks from Eagle is going to do Eagle Floodplain Permitting and Program presentation. Ray Hasbach is going to be doing a local buildings regulations presentation. He's from Saginaw Township. And from FEMA, Dan Schulman will be talking about moving forward under the Federal Disaster Declaration. And then after those presentations, we'll open it up for questions and answers from all of you. With that, I'm going to turn over to Teresa Seidel. Teresa, you there? Do you want to do your remarks?
I am here.
All right.
Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome back for the second of, I don't know how many of these we're going to do, but welcome back for the second one in a row. We did one last week, and that one was more related to a broad spectrum of recovery programs that the agency is working on to assist the citizens in mid-Michigan. But tonight's webinar is really to assist you with some of these other programs that you can see on the screen there. We want to welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Teresa Seidel. I'm the Water Resources Division Director here at Eagle. We're glad to have you join us. We really want to focus on permitting and regulatory programs tonight, and that things that you might encounter as you're going about trying to recover and restore your property after the floods that devastated the Midland area here back in May. So we want to make sure we get as much information out to you as we can. Really pleased to have all of my Eagle staff here to help out tonight, but also to welcome Ray Hosback from Saginaw Township to talk about local building issues and local building codes. So thank you, Ray, for joining us. In addition, after the disaster declaration that was issued last week, we wanted to make sure that FEMA was here to talk to you about that recent declaration, and they'll be available to answer any questions about FEMA's floodplain programs. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to welcome you for joining us tonight, and thank you for being here, and we'll get this show started so you can get your questions answered quicker. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Teresa. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Brian. Brian, are you there?
I am here. Do you? There we go.
We see you. We don't see your screen yet, though.
Oh,
so.
Okay. My apologies. How about now?
Hold on. No, I'm waiting for it. I'm gonna try it again here. Let me try this one more time, Brian. I'm gonna bring it back to me here. Okay. And let me try it over to you here.
Okay. I can show my screen.
There we go. All right, now we're good.
Great. All right. So welcome everybody, and thanks for coming out tonight. As Jim and Teresa said, my name is Brian Rudolph. I'm the District Supervisor for the Water Resource Division in the Bay City District Office. I'm going to spend a little bit of time tonight talking about some of the common permitting projects, some of the requirements, and then I'll be turning it over to Joy Brooks, who's going to speak more specifically on floodplain projects. So here's the big question. When do I need a permit from Eagle? Well, generally speaking, if you're doing work in any regulated area, such as a floodplain, streams, wetlands, exposed bottomlands, you'll need to get a permit from Eagle. Primarily, for the situations we're looking at, we're talking about Part 301 of Inland Lakes and Streams of the Natural Resource Environmental Protection Act, also known as NREPA, or Act 451 of 1994. A couple of key points before we get too far into it. There's the main questions that are addressed when you look at Part 301 is what actually constitutes a lake, an inland lake, and what constitutes a stream. And these are the definitions out of statute. So an inland lake is any natural or artificial lake, pond, or an impoundment 5 acres or greater in surface area. Stream is a river, stream, or a body of water with a definite banks, bed, visible evidence of water, continued flow. And this does not include the Great Lakes. The differentiation between inland lake and stream seems pretty easy, but on the Tittabawassee River system, it becomes important because there's obviously a break when we move from a lake system, such as Sanford, Wixom, Smallwood, or Secord, back into the river channel and then to the next dam. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're close to where you're in that transition from lake to stream, feel free to give us a call. We generally use the FEMA floodplain maps as a distinction, and we can help you make that distinction. Another very important point when determining whether your activity is going to require a permit or not is understanding this idea of the ordinary high water mark. As you can see in this photo, there's 2 ways to define. Sorry, folks, it appears I've lost audio. Okay, Jim, can you still hear me?
Yeah, Brian, you're just kind of going in and out a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, it's sending me a message that says my audio is falling out. So let me know if I need to circle back to anything. Sorry,
Yeah, if
folks.
you might have to have you turn off your camera because that might be causing it.
Okay, no problem. All right, so the ordinary high water mark. Essentially, for natural bodies of water, as you can see on this photo, it's the transitional area between the upland and the actual water body. It's defined by the transition between an upland habitat, a lot of cases your lawn, and the aquatic habitat, which is the shoreline, the sand, the river system itself. What's critical for the Tittabawassee system is the second part here that's highlighted. And on lakes with an established lake level under Part 307, that established elevation constitutes the ordinary high water mark from a regulatory standpoint. So all 4 of the lakes on the Tittabawassee chain have a legal lake level that was established under Part 307, and that for regulatory purposes is what we use as the line for when it's a regulated activity and when it's not. Okay, we seem to be having all kinds of problems here.
Yeah, you might. There you go. Make sure you just click in the middle of your screen where your presentation is and try to click there now. Now try to click it.
Okay, there we go. Well, it wouldn't be a webinar without some technical problems. So moving on. So what are the activities that require a permit under 301? Specific activities are dredging or filling on a bottomland, constructing, enlarging, extending, removing, or putting any structure on a bottomland, creating, enlarging, or diminishing an inland lake or stream, structurally interfering with the flow of water, or any of these other activities that extend or enlarge or actually create another water body within 500 feet of an inland lake or stream. These all require a permit under Part 301. So in a little less legalese, If you're dredging, filling, grading on the exposed bottom land in front of your seawall, that will require a permit. If you're replacing your seawall, or if you're installing a new one where there wasn't one previously, that will require a permit. Installing new rock riprap, putting any sort of structure on the bottom land, such as a dock or a deck, any other type of structure would require a permit. Dredging, in this case, for example, removing logs or stumps from the bottom land, would also require a permit. So let's take a quick look at what we're talking about. This is a photo of in-process installation of a seawall. You can see the tie bags being put in. You can see toe stone in front of it. And there's some important considerations when we issue permits for seawalls. First, all seawalls require toe stone, and 100% of the length of the wall is the standard requirement. There's an important reason for this. There's really two. One is to protect your wall from wave action and additional erosion at the toe. What happens is you get a lot of erosive force. The waves hit your wall. They tend to drive straight down, and all that energy just eventually scours out the bottom of your seawall. By putting toe stone in front of your wall, it acts to deflect that energy, disperses it away, and protects your toe stone, or excuse me, protects your seawall in the long run. So that's critically important. We don't want to see folks spend a bunch of money on a wall that's going to end up kicking out a few years down the road. Additionally, there's a habitat benefit from having toe stone in that it provides nooks and crannies and microhabitat for insects, aquatic insects, and small bait fish. Some habitat, some rearing habitat, and that's critically important for the fisheries and your future fishery on your lakes. Seawalls that end up over 100 feet may require a wildlife access opening. This isn't always sort of requirement, but in some situations we do. Kind of depends on the area, the type of water body. Oftentimes these just end up becoming a small beach area or just an access point for folks in and out of their yard to the water. If your seawall is over 300 feet, then it ends up having to go through what's called the public notice process. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And again, the toe stone is important. It's important to protect your wall, so we require that that's immediately installed upon completion of your construction. So what are we talking about with toe stone? Well, it sort of looks like this. It's a 1-on-2 slope, 6 inches above the ordinary high water mark is typically the requirement. There are some instances in which we can reduce it from 100%. It's very site specific, but there are opportunities for that as needed. I'm going to talk a little bit about our permitting structure. We have essentially 4 different categories of permits. The most basic or straightforward is called a general permit. It's a $50 application fee. We then have a minor project. Well, we have minor projects. There's about 50 different types of minor projects, and those have an application fee of $100. If your project doesn't fit a GP or an MP, then it's processed as an individual permit, and that's where the public noticing requirement comes in. In those instances, there's a mandatory 20-day waiting period in which we give adjacent property owners, interested members of the public, municipalities the opportunity to comment on your project. The 4th category is less common. It's referred to as major projects. It's a $2,000 application fee. These are for very large projects, things such as seawalls that are greater than 500 feet, 10,000 cubic yards of dredging, not the sort of work that's typically undertaken by homeowners. What is typically undertaken, especially on lakes, is the minor project category for a replacement seawall. And this is one that we probably, when we talk about shoreline protection, we deal with more than anything. You can see the criteria here. It's very straightforward. I should also note that if you go to our webpage and you look under inland lakes or streams, you'll see minor project categories and the general permit categories, a link to those. The one key point at the bottom is it has to meet the definition of a failed seawall. So what does that mean? Well, there's 2 points. One, essentially it means that at least half of the wall is still there and doing its job. The other criteria is a situation where the seawall was working and it was functional and retaining soil, but was damaged by a single catastrophic event. That's obviously the one that's going to be applicable to the situations we're talking about. As an example of an installed seawall with a slope, you can see the toe stone put in. You can see on the adjacent property just rock riprap, and rock riprap is a good alternative for many sites. If you don't have a serious erosive force, if you've got a gentle slope, you can use appropriately sized rock riprap, and it will work very well, and it will save you the additional cost of having to install a vertical wall behind it. Some other projects that require permits are docks. Permits are required for permanent docks. We do have a minor project category for those. It is important to note that a cantilever dock does still require a permit. Just because there's no posts going into the bottom land, it still requires a permit because it extends out beyond the break line between the upland and the bottom land. Applications for 2 docks, permanent or a deck, obviously permits are required, but those have to be processed as an individual permit, and again, they go through public noticing. One point that I like to remind folks, if you're putting in a permanent structure below the ordinary high water mark, be thoughtful of the activities that happen not just with boats. So we recommend you put in highly visible reflectors so that snowmobilers, folks that might be out on the ice in the wintertime can see those. It's a good protection for you as a property owner. Dredging, another activity. Any excavation below the ordinary high water mark of an inland lake or stream is going to require a permit. And an important note is that this includes the removal of stumps, large woody debris. And when I say that, what I'm really talking about is the woody debris that's been established as part of the river system. It's partially or mostly buried and has been since before the flood event. We recognize there's a lot of debris out there. There's a lot of stuff that washed down, and that's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about well-established woody material, and obviously the stumps. Removing those is a dredge, and it can have a very significant negative impact on the aquatic habitat and your future fisheries population. Culverts and bridges. There's more to have to talk about culverts and bridges than we could really delve into in detail tonight. So I do know that there are a number of private roads where the culverts need to be replaced. If you're in that situation, please review the minor project categories, review the general permit categories. There's some key points that you need to be familiar with, such as this reference in the second point of bank full width. Those might require the help of an engineer to actually help you with the design. It's really important to understand, though, that if you can't meet the MP or GP requirements, you may end up having to do some additional engineering because of the need for hydraulic analysis. And when we talk about that, it's because we want to ensure that we don't cause problems in the next flood event. So we want to make sure we have enough capacity to pass water through those culverts. So what doesn't require a permit? Well, work behind your existing seawall, such as re-supporting it, putting in new tiebacks, does not require a permit. Repairs to your existing seawall where you're only working on 25% or less, same material, same design, is also exempt, does not require a permit. If you had rock riprap that was displaced by erosion or the flood itself, you can reset that or reinstall that. Private residential seasonal docks, if they're of a similar size and nature to the docks in the surrounding area, they don't present a navigation hazard, those are also exempt, don't require permits. Beach sanding to the water's edge. And the bottom one, which again, I'll touch on, is debris removal. There's a lot of debris removal activity that's beginning to happen, is going to be occurring. If we aren't talking about a dredge, you're simply going out, removing it. And even if, in cases where you've got folks, you'll see folks out there with heavy equipment, but they're just literally picking things up and removing them from the bottom land or the floodplain. That's not the sort of work that requires a permit because it's not a dredge. Real briefly on wetlands protection, part 303. This isn't really a concern on the lake basins themselves, but as you move up into the river, more riverine portions and some of the lagoon areas, we do have some pretty extensive wetland development. So just to be aware of what activities require a permit, they're very similar to 301. If you're going to place fill, if you're going to dredge, if you're going to construct anything, maintain a use, or maintain a development within a wetland, or drain surface water from the wetland, those activities are all going to require a permit from Eagle. And one final note on Part 91, soil erosion sedimentation control. This is a program that's administered through the county, although the state does have oversight of the program itself. You should be aware of this. If you're going to disturb 1 or more acres of land, or if you're going to do any earth moving within 500 feet of a lake or stream, you should be checking with your county on Part 91 requirements. There are a number of exemptions, so make sure you're talking to your local folks. If you happen to be an authorized public agency, you wouldn't need a soil erosion permit because you are a permitting body yourself. And again, these permits have to be obtained prior to doing the earth change. So please make sure you're contacting your county soil erosion officials for details. This is my contact information. If you have questions that don't get answered tonight, please feel free to give me a call. We're happy to work with you and try to answer the questions as best we can. That is our webpage at the bottom. And with that, Jim, I can turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Brian. And just to remind everybody, in the handouts tab, we've got handouts for tonight. And one of those handouts is a contact list. And that contact list actually has got the county contacts for like soil erosion sedimentation control permits and some of the things that Brian was talking about. So I'm going to turn it over to Joy Brooks, Eagle. Joy, are you there? Joy?
I'm here, thanks.
Okay.
And we're going to show my screen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Gotcha.
All right. Thank you again. I am Joy Brooks. I am the district floodplain engineer for all 12 of our district counties here in the Bay City District Office, and that includes all 5 of our counties that were affected by flooding, and all 6 counties if we include Ogama, although they weren't included in any of the declaration. I know that they did have some flood damage there as well. Michigan's floodplain regulations have been around since the late 60s, and they are currently residing in the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act of 1994, similar to inland lakes and streams and wetlands. And they are in Part 31, which is water resources protection. Under Part 31, it's our goal to basically prevent flooding from being worse. So we call it a harmful interference, but what it kind of boils down to is we don't want to see projects that are going to increase or make flooding worse on other people. The reason that we have these regulations and the reason that we are requiring these permits is to make sure that people are safe, that their property is safe, and that we protect our natural resources as well. Unfortunately, most of us now know what a floodplain looks like. By definition, it's the channel of the river and the area on the river banks where the water's got to go when we get too much rain. For regulatory purposes, we regulate to what we call the 100-year floodplain. And the 100-year floodplain is a really bad way to talk about our floodplains. It implies that once we have a 100-year flood, we're not going to see another one again for another 100 years. It's kind of like that really bad nickname you got in the 4th grade and can never shake, and you hear it every time you go back to your hometown. What it really means is that the areas identified in that special flood hazard area, that 100-year floodplain, they have a 1% chance of being flooded every year. Over forever, that can average out to once in 100 years. But when we're looking at real life risk management, it is literally, this area has a 1% chance to flood this year, next year, and the year after that. And there are different ways to identify those. One of the really great resources that we have are called flood insurance rate maps. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has produced floodplain maps in all 5 of our flooded counties, and they are available at this website, which is also in the contact list, so you don't have to write anything down. But we also have several counties with geographic information systems, and these are basically maps that are online, and you can go and you can actually choose the type of information that you want to see. So you can choose zoning boundaries or parcel information. Some of them have parks or wetlands, but you can also choose a floodplain layer so that you can see exactly where that regulated floodplain is. Now, under the state's floodplain law, we regulate floodplains of rivers, regardless of whether they're mapped or not. So if you're in an area without a map, but you're near a river, you're probably going to want to give us a call just in case, and we can help make sure whether you're in that floodplain and whether or not you are going to need a permit or not. But these maps are a really great resource. Aranac and Iosco County are currently having their maps updated, but those updates are only along the shoreline to reflect new coastal studies that FEMA and their partners have done to better predict our shoreline flooding risks. And Saginaw County will get new preliminary maps later this year, so they're going to be in the process of updating those maps shortly. This is an example of FEMA's flood insurance rate map. It includes the 100-year floodplain. Obviously, it's going to show that boundary. It gives you a rounded flood elevation, which is helpful for planning purposes, and it also defines the floodway. And I'm going to come back to the floodway in just a couple slides. Now that we've got a fair idea about our floodplain boundaries, what do we regulate under Part 31, which is our floodplain state law? First and foremost, we're going to regulate filling. And I'll be honest, some of the saddest filling activities that I've seen are after this particular flood, where we're filling in places where there were homes and now there are just empty basements. Those are regulated activities that fill still requires a permit. Even when we are elevating structures so that our lowest floor is above the floodplain and filling in crawl spaces or basements, that filling too requires a Part 31 floodplain permit. Grading, just moving dirt around on the site requires the floodplain permit as well. An example that we've seen is when a house has to be demolished. The demolition of that structure is exempt under Part 31. It doesn't require a permit, but the final grading that happens, that part would require a state floodplain permit. Now, remember that the demolition is going to require local permits as well, as will the filling and grading, but just for the state permit, it's going to be the final grading on structures that are being removed. And then when we have new construction in the floodplain, or even if something's torn down and we're reconstructing in the floodplain, that's definitely a regulated activities. Brian spoke briefly about bridges and culverts. Those are regulated, obviously on streams, because they have those regulated floodplains. And I encourage you to give us a call too if you have a bridge or culvert that you need to replace. There are some ways that you can design your project to avoid having to do a large engineering analysis, but it's something that we're going to want to discuss about your project before you get too far into the planning. So we're happy to help you get through that. Back to our floodways. When we look at our floodplains, we divide them into 2 different areas, the floodway and the floodway fringe. Now, the floodway is the actual channel of the river and the areas on the riverbanks that literally carries the bulk of the flood flows. This is not the area where water just sits and is like a bathtub, a storage area. This is the high velocity moving area. It is the most dangerous part of our floodplains. And when we do our mapping studies, these are areas that the models show that if we do fill or put buildings or do other encroachments in these areas, we are going to cause water to back up and the flooding is going to be higher than it was upstream. So these are highly, highly regulated areas. These are not areas where there are many minor projects, as Brian talked about. But one of the things about the state floodplain law is that we don't allow new habitation within the floodway. We don't allow new residential construction there. And I know that we have seen houses that were built before the state floodplain law, before we had maps, before we had these places identified. There were structures there that were basically grandfathered in. And I know that we've seen damage to these structures, and I know that there are people who are looking to tear down those structures and rebuild. We do have some allowance for rebuilding within the floodway portion of the floodplain. These are not simple projects. They're not minor projects. We require that, first of all, you rebuild right away. If you come back to us in 10 years and no one has been living in the structure, that's going to be a new habitation in the floodway, and it's something that the law doesn't let us do. But if we get right on it, you can show that you've been working to rebuild and go through the process. Normally, if it's less than 2 years and you're the owner, we can get you through a permitting process. We do need to have you in the same footprint of the existing structure. And your structure will need to come up to current codes. That includes elevation. The building code talks about sometimes having to do engineering foundations in the floodway portion of the floodplain, depending on the depth of the water. So it's tricky, and we can help when you're in that situation. Those are going to be types of projects where you're going to want to reach out to me, and we can help you find a way through that. So on the other side, there are projects where we don't need a state floodplain permit. One of the big ones is when you're making repairs inside the structure. You know, you've got to cut out the drywall, you've got to dry out the floor and repair that. That does not require a state floodplain permit. Now, within the mapped floodplain, you probably will need a building permit as well. And Ray's going to talk about that more, but I don't want to forget to say that all of these instances when you need the state floodplain permit, you need to be thinking about those local floodplain building permits as well. If you are replacing septic systems, or if you are doing utility work where you're going to be bringing things back into the original grade, you don't need a state floodplain permit for that. There's specific exemptions for that. If you're planting vegetation and you don't need to bring in fill, you don't need to have a floodplain permit for that. If you do need a mounded system, though, for a replacement septic system, that would require a state floodplain permit for that additional fill in the floodplain. And if you're elevating an existing home in the floodplain and there's no filling or grading, you're just raising up that structure, you don't need a state floodplain permit for that. However, if you need stairs or decks or other structures basically outside in order to access your newly raised home, the structures would require the state floodplain permit, but the actual building and raising of the structure wouldn't. I can give you an example. I had a structure in Vassar where they elevated the home and actually put a garage underneath the house. And there was interior stairway to get into the house. So that didn't require any state floodplain permitting to raise that structure. So we've got a lot of information about when we need permits. How do we get them? Brian talked briefly about My Waters. It's our online application system. There are 3 basic things that we need with an application. One is the application itself, and it is an online government form. Be patient with it. Answer the questions as best you can. You'd be surprised how much information you're going to give us just by being patient and going through it one at a time. The other big thing that we need are project plans. And I chose this particular sample drawing just to show you that we don't necessarily need an engineered drawing. We don't need blueprints necessarily. You can draw these things out yourselves. The thing that we really need are really good measurements. So this shows floodplain fill. It shows the measurements of the fill. Other things that we need that isn't shown on this particular plan is how far away is this house from the road, or how far from the river is this fill going to be? When we get all those types of measurements in on a plan, it makes it very easy for us to review the information. And the third thing we're going to need is photos. If you have pre-flood photos, we absolutely want to see them, but we definitely want to see the site in their current condition. And one of the big reasons is that we're trying to expedite our post-flood permitting so that we can get you guys back going as fast as we can. And every floodplain engineer in the state is helping. So if you send us an application and you hear from someone other than me, it's because we have all of our floodplain engineers trying to help. This is what the website for our My Waters database looks like. Down here, it's going to ask you to create an account, and it's simple. You put your email in, you give your contact. It's going to ask you for a bazillion security questions, but once you have an account, then you can go ahead and go in and start the application. And the application that you're going to choose, the actual form, is called the Joint Permit Application. And this is my absolute favorite website that we have, my personal favorite. It's michigan.gov/joint permit. So hopefully that'll help you remember the name of the form that you need. But this has links to almost everything else you need to fill out an application. It has a link to My Waters, and it has information and tutorials on how to use the database, which they worked really hard to put together. And trust me, when we switched over to the database, I had to use them too. It has sample drawing links. It has links to our other programs. It's got our minor project categories and that general permit category that Brian was talking about. So this is my one-stop shopping for permitting. And when I need to find stuff on our webpage, I often start here. So I hope this helps you. This is my contact information, and I also put FEMA's Map Service Center here. If you're using their online maps, sometimes it's easier to contact them directly. It's their website and they're their maps. I can always try to help you, but sometimes it's nice to talk to people who actually put the stuff together. All of these are in the contact handout that's available with the documents. When you're working outside of your structure and you're moving dirt, remember to contact your county soil erosion agent. And when you're in the 100-year floodplain, be sure to contact your local building official. And I think Ray is going to talk more about the local building requirements. We've got, before I let you go, this last slide, we do have a YouTube channel. You can send us your email for updates, and we are on Twitter. And the YouTube channel actually has some really cool stuff on it if you ever get a chance to check it out. So that's all I have for now, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Joy. All right, now we are going to go over to Ray. And Ray, you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay, yep. So you can go ahead and, well, yeah, hold on a second. I'm just gonna bring my, yep, go ahead, you can go ahead.
Okay. My name is Ray Hosbeck. I'm the Assistant Director of Community Development in Saginaw Township. But what I do with most of my time is I'm a building inspector. And one of the things I do is when we have a disaster like this come through our community, I help people get permitting that they need to repair, demolish, replace their homes. So Joy asked me to join in and give you some basic information about Saginaw Township and what I do. But throughout all the different communities in the state of Michigan, there are building inspectors that have authority in their own community. So I'm really only speaking for Saginaw Township. So if you're in Midland or if you're in the city of Saginaw, there's going to be a different building official you have to deal with. But you know, if you have some general questions, feel free to give me a call and I'll try to steer you or push in the right direction. But a little bit more about Saginaw Township. We're a community of about 40,000 people. We're about 24 square miles of area. And we have about 9 miles on our south and west border that are along the Tittabawassee River. And that's what's causing me grief right now, along with a lot of you. So as far as what gives me the authority to enforce the building code is Public Act 230 of 1972 as amended. Basically gives the state of Michigan and me the right to enforce this 2015 building code. This one happens to be the residential building code, but there's also a commercial building code as well. And one of the first questions people ask me is, do I need a building permit to do this repair or whatever? So I just wanted to let you know that right in the administration section of that code, section R105, it talks about what is exempt from building permits or electrical permits, plumbing, mechanical permits, and so on. But generally speaking, papers, painting, tiling, carpeting, cabinets, countertops, and similar finish materials specifically exempt from a building permit. LARA, Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, went further years ago and said that you don't need permits to replace siding, windows, and roof covering as well. So you'll find in other areas people look at what's exempt from permitting a little bit differently. And I'll repeat this a couple times. The best advice I can give you in Saginaw Township, you want to do some work to your home or your business, give me a call. We'll talk about your specific situation and decide whether it needs a building permit or not. And then what I also wanted to let you know about that same code book that I was telling you about, that's where you're going to find the basic information throughout the entire state of Michigan. It says you shall build with flood resistant construction when you build new or when you have substantial improvements. And I will touch on substantial improvements a little bit later in my talk here. But before I go there, Saginaw Township back in 1979 or so got their first flood insurance program maps. These firm maps, I don't know if you've ever seen these before. This is folded up. I'm not going to unfold it for you, but this basically is a mapping of the floodplain, the 1% chance of flooding, like Joy was talking about. It also gives us floodways and general flood elevations and things like that. So a lot of useful information in there. So when you give me your property address, I can use these maps, or I can go on our Saginaw County SAGA website, CIS website, and punch in your address there and hit a layer like Joy was telling you, and it will give me a 100-year floodplain layer, a 500-year floodplain layer, and that will help me decide whether the structure you're in is going to be permitted or regulated through the state floodplain management program. So again, when you come to me and want to repair your house that's damaged by flood, when I analyze it, I'll be able to tell you whether, hey, your project is such that you need to get a permit from the state of Michigan, EGLE, prior to me giving you a permit. That's kind of the safety net there. So I cannot give you a building permit to make improvements to your home until EGLE gives you a permit first, if you're not exempt from them, like Joy was telling you before. Also, I want to let you know that the building code is pretty basic when it talks about these requirements. So Saginaw Township back in 1979 passed an ordinance, a floodplain ordinance that talks about in more detail substantial improvement and so on. So we used not only the Michigan Residential Code 2015, but also our ordinance to help enforce that, and some policies that we've used over the years. If you happen to live in the regulated floodplain or near it in Saginaw Township, once a year, you've probably got a letter from me. It looks like this. It's like 4 pages long, and it basically talks about the floodplains, the hazards of it, and other things that you might need to know. It also talks about how to build responsibly and when to give me a call for permitting and things like that. So what I'm going to talk about next is maybe a little bit more specific, because when I would say just about all the houses that were damaged by flood in my area had water coming in the basement, whether they're finished or not. They had furnaces down there, water heaters, electrical services, outlets, and things like that that all were submerged in water. So we've been writing a lot of permits to replace electrical services, to replace outlets and wiring, because once they get wet, it's very difficult to just recondition those. And also Romex tends to wick up water for a certain distance, so much of that has to be replaced. You can recondition distribution panels, electrical services, but oftentimes it's just more cost effective to replace them. A lot of permits for replacement of furnaces and water heaters that were in the basements. And those, they can be reconditioned as well, but again, depending on how old they are, it's oftentimes more cost effective just simply to replace those. You do need to get permits to do those replacements for electrical services, electrical outlets and wiring, for furnaces, and for water heater replacements. And I want to let you know too, those are separate from building permits. Building permits deal with architectural trades work, like foundations, floor covering, and so on. And electrical permit obviously deals with replacing electrical panels, outlets, and the like. We would do a plumbing mechanical permit for a furnace water heater replacement. And there's separate inspectors that do those inspections as well. I just do the architectural trades inspection. So as far as that goes, I've written several permits already to do structural repairs, but not to the point of what we call substantial improvements yet. So basically what that means is a portion of a foundation wall broke, a hole broke in it, water, mud came in there, cleaned that out, and now they're in the process of rebuilding that wall. Or water came up to the floor system, and when they started drying it out, the underlayment was warped and they had to pull that stuff off. Or the sheathing was, for the most part, the structural members can be dried and salvaged. So I've been writing permits to do that type of work and doing inspections on that as of late. Let's see. And so I think I talked about separate permits for electrical, plumbing, mechanical, and building. I want to talk about substantial damage. So in our ordinance and in the building code, it talks about buildings that have damage more than 50% of their market value. So when that happens, our ordinance is going to require, as well as the building code, that entire structure be brought up to floodplain standards. And what that really means is that the finished floor, including the basement, if you have one, has to be brought up to 1 foot above base flood elevation, or the 100-year, the 1% chance of flooding. So that's where you saw that picture that Joy had about a dump truck filling in a basement. That might be something that happens. For example, many years ago, I had a fire in a house that was built in a 100-year floodplain, special flood hazard area. And it was going to cost more than half of its value to fix it up. So we ended up having the basement filled in into a crawl space and then elevating the home about 1 foot or 2 and taking all the equipment that was in the basement, putting that up on the first floor in order to elevate all that as well. Very emotional thing for the homeowner. And I think that's the first time I had a homeowner crying in my office. So it's a difficult time, but they ended up selling that house to somebody who did the work, and life went on. So if you have a flood damaged home and the cost to repair it is more than half of its value, that's when that's going to happen. And that's when I need to get Eagle involved and Joy involved in giving permits to potentially raise that house up and expand it or whatever has to be done except for those exceptions that Joy mentioned. Also, there's some argument to say, what's my house worth? Some people think their house is worth a lot, depends on if you're selling it or buying it, you know. So what we have done is use the SEV, or the state equalized value that the assessors give each piece of property, and they change that as need be. So we use that. So for example, if I see a home that's being repaired and the SEV is $100,000, if the homeowner is proposing some work to that home to repair it, I'll ask them what the cost estimate is to repair that work. If it exceeds $100,000, that's going to be the trigger to bring that up to current floodplain standards, because at that point we will determine that to be a substantial damage. Also, oftentimes when things like this happen, people say, now is the time to put that addition on my house that I've been thinking about for a while, since I'm going to put money into this property. Whatever you do new additions to this home, that has to be brought up to current standards, or built at current standards. If that addition is 50% or more of the entire structure, that's a trigger for the entire structure to be brought up as well. So substantial improvement, stuff, ugly stuff, it makes people very unhappy to have to deal with that, and unfortunately we have to deal with that from time to time. But I want to leave this program by saying that the best advice I can give you is to give me a call and let me know where your property is in Saginaw Township, and have me schedule an on-site visit with you so we can talk about your specific situation, what your goal is, and how we can work together to make that happen. Because every project is unique, and it's hard to be really broad and general and cover everybody's questions. But an on-site visit is going to be the best way to do that, and I'm certainly willing to do that in Saginaw Township. That's what I'm here for. And I believe that my contact information is going to be given at the end of the program as well. So feel free to contact me. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ray. Appreciate the presentation. We're going to go to Dan Schulman now. Dan.
Good evening, everyone. Can you see me okay, and can you see my presentation okay?
Yes, we got you.
Awesome, great. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to our partners at Michigan Eagle for hosting this webinar and giving FEMA an opportunity to directly engage with survivors. We've already taken a couple of questions in the chat box on the side, so please feel free to keep writing those questions. We'll get to them. If I don't get them in my presentation, certainly get a follow-up to you. So many of you are aware of FEMA's programs. Unfortunately, you went through a lot of these types of issues in 2017. And I want to reassure you that because of the COVID-19 pandemic, FEMA's operational posture is going to be different. But even though our posture will look different, FEMA is no less committed to serving every survivor as a result of this disaster. The first step for anyone that needs assistance is to register with FEMA, and more information is available on the slide. This will be provided as a part of the handouts. You have the opportunity to give us a call, 1-800-621-3362. Our TTY number is there also for people that use that system, as well as 711 and video relay service. You should call the main 1-800 number. Visit our website at disasterassistance.gov, or another option is to download the FEMA app to your iPhone or Android device, and it's available in both of those app stores. I know that many of you have previously provided information in response to a 211 call or to your local government or county. This helped the state develop their request for a declaration of disaster to President Trump, but did not register you for assistance. If you did not call, go online, or download the FEMA app, you'll need to do so now. You'll know that you did so because at the end of the process, you'll receive a 9-digit registration number from FEMA. Once you register, you may be contacted by FEMA to follow up and conduct a virtual inspection. Again, unlike 2017, FEMA inspectors are doing their inspections virtually by phone and asking you to submit additional documentation as needed. The phone call will be to ask you questions about your damage and your disaster needs. As a part of this process, again, you may be asked to submit documentation and will be told how to do so during that inspection call. In some very limited cases, FEMA may send an inspector out to do a physical inspection, but this will be a no contact and outdoors only inspection of the damaged dwelling. Following those inspections, either virtual or in person, individuals opting to receive assistance by direct deposit can see money in their bank account in as little as 48 hours or less. Already, just since Friday in the declaration of disaster, FEMA has approved more than $4.5 million in disaster assistance, with nearly $3.8 million already dispersed. It's important to understand that FEMA's disaster assistance programs are not intended to make people whole. We're only authorized to provide limited assistance for essential repairs to essential areas of the primary residence or to replace essential items. FEMA can provide assistance for temporary housing, like rent, while you're repairing your home, money to make general repairs, clean and sanitize essential systems like water heaters and appliances, for water heaters and furnaces, replace other essential appliances, repair and restore electricity, and generally make your primary residence safe, sanitary, and secure. FEMA does not cover second homes, basements used only as recreation rooms, docks, sheds, other outside buildings, or repairs to landscaping, etc. Renters are also eligible for assistance, but assistance will be limited to replacing their personal property, temporary housing, or other non-repair types of assistance. In some cases, FEMA can provide assistance with medical costs caused by the flooding, as well as increased childcare, transportation, and moving and storage costs. When you apply, you may be referred to the U.S. Small Business Administration for a low-interest disaster recovery loan. You don't have to accept a loan, but you must complete and return the application, if you receive one, to remain eligible for other types of federal assistance. There's no cost to complete the loan application, and it doesn't affect your credit. In fact, if you give us a call back at the 1-800 number, FEMA will refer you to SBA, who will walk you through filling out the application for them. Unfortunately, not everyone will be determined eligible for assistance. Those determined not to be eligible for a FEMA grant or who do not receive as much assistance as they think should call us back to either request additional assistance or appeal the decision. Or if you just don't understand what's going on, please give us a call and we'll walk you through your application and what's happening with your case. More information about the decision that was made will be in a letter that you received from FEMA. So please carefully read whatever we send you and stay in touch with us to let us know how we can reach you by updating your mailing address, email address, and phone number. This is especially important if you are one of the many people who are displaced by the disaster and are staying with friends and family or in a hotel. Again, please let us know where we can send you correspondence. And if you have not already done so, we do want you to get registered as quickly as possible. As I've indicated, FEMA has already provided substantial amounts of money to residents of the affected area, and we will continue to work with disaster survivors to make sure that they're eligible for the assistance that they need. Again, the registration information is to call 1-800-621-3362, visit disasterassistance.gov, or download the FEMA app to your iPhone or Android device. I'll be happy to take any questions that people may have either in the chat box or in the question and answer period after the presentations. Thank you all very much and have a great evening.
All right, thanks, Dan. So right now I'm going to bring the slideshow back to me here. Make sure I get my slides up. All right, so now we're moving into the Q&A portion of tonight. And so if you want, all panelists, if you turn on your cameras there, if you feel comfortable doing that, go ahead and we'll start going through a few questions. Before I do that, I'm going to ask our viewers here just a quick poll question, because this helps us get an idea of how many people are watching the webinar out there, and then we'll go to Q&A. So if you take a quick minute to let us know. And while we're waiting, it looks like, yeah, Dan did answer a few questions that came in. The first question we have here now looks like for Brian, I think. Does a seawall essentially remove the area behind it from the floodplain? Would that area still be regulated?
Well, generally speaking, if we're talking about seawalls on a lake, under Part 31, we don't typically regulate a floodplain area on lakes. And Joy can talk about that a little more, explain that a little better. However, putting a seawall on your property in the river does not change the floodplain or the mapped floodplain on your property. So Joy, maybe you can explain the difference on lakes and rivers and how you administer Part 31.
Thanks. It took me a second to get unmuted. You can remove a site from the special flood hazard area from the mapped floodplain by bringing in engineered fill. This is going to apply to any mapped floodplain regardless of whether it's on a lake or a river or even on the Great Lakes. You have to get the proper permits, and depending on whether or not some of that is in the floodway, if it's a seawall on a river and that close to the channel, you may end up with some engineering analysis for that. But there is a process that you can go through to remove an area from the 100-year floodplain through engineered fill and through FEMA's process. So yes, that's possible with proper engineering and proper permitting.
Okay, thanks, Joy. I forgot, I gotta also introduce a couple other panelists we have that didn't present tonight from FEMA. James Sink is on from FEMA, as well as Eric Kukluski. So they might also be joining us to answer some of these questions. And just to remind you, if you have a question, go ahead and type it into the question box and we will get to those. This question goes to Ray. So Ray, this person wants to know, who is a person in the city of Midland to see about permitting if we are in substantial improvement?
Yeah, that person is Steve Taglauer.
And
Okay.
all of the building officials for the affected communities and counties are listed in the document called Flood Recovery Contacts. So Steve's information is going to be in that document for you, as well as building officials for Iosco, Aranac, the rest of Saginaw and Gladwin, and the rest of Midland.
Okay, good. I think it looks like Dan just answered this, but for those of you that aren't watching the chat bar, my mother was not in the floodplain, did not have flood insurance. She lost all mechanicals, furnace, AC, washer, dryer. Can she expect some assistance from FEMA?
So I did put an answer in the chat box, but I'll answer it over the webinar as well. I can't make a determination about eligibility based on that limited information. We do want her to get registered. If she has challenges registering on her own, you certainly can call with her and help her get registered. For individuals, especially the elderly, people with access and functional needs, if they have someone that they trust that they can call with them, we'll ask identity verification questions with the primary applicant, who can then give a verbal authorization to a relative to speak on their behalf while they're there on the phone. So please get her registered and we'll work with her to determine her eligibility. You don't have to live in the floodplain. You don't have to or be in or out of the floodplain to be eligible. We'll work with anyone that was affected by the disaster to determine their eligibility. But again, I can't tell you based on the limited amount of information that's here tonight and in front of all these people. I don't want to start working on individual cases. So please call, go online, get registered, and we'll work with her directly or with you on her behalf.
All right. Thanks. Okay, so this other question is for FEMA folks as well. This is a question I had too when you brought up that slide about SBA loans. It says you have to apply for an SBA loan. We have one from 3 years ago and can't afford another one.
So we do. Once people call and register, many people that register will be referred to the SBA. Some assistance from FEMA is immediate. Other assistance is dependent on that SBA loan application. So if you are referred to SBA for a loan, you have to complete the loan application. Again, there's no cost to complete the application. It doesn't affect your credit. to either apply for it or be denied by SBA, but it is a necessary part of the process. If SBA determines that you cannot get another loan, they will refer you back to FEMA for additional grant assistance. But it is a necessary part of the process. Again, FEMA alone cannot make people whole. However, we work in partnership with the Small Business Administration that can make available low interest, long-term loans to help people put the finishing touches on their residences as they're rebuilding from a disaster.
Okay. In determining the value of your home, in order to determine substantial damage at 50%, FEMA allows 5 different methods of determining value. You mentioned using state SCV numbers. Can other suggested methods such as real appraisals or ACV numbers be used so as to lower the ratio, putting them into substantial improvement and avoid the heavy penalties created? I know it was a long question.
That question for me?
It might be, Ray, because I know you were the one that was talking about the values.
The reason we use SEV is because we're trying to be consistent throughout. I'm not opposed to, in certain situations, take a look at other reasonable assessments of the property done by professionals, for sure. If SEV isn't the number that we can agree on, then I'm certainly interested in or willing to entertain other avenues. I'll take that information to my superiors and we'll make a decision. But I'm not opposed to it.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks. Go ahead.
Sorry, this is Eric Kukleski with FEMA. Yeah, I would echo Ray's comments about consistency. The person asking the question is correct that we do have guidance out there with various techniques, but what's important for the community to do in these circumstances, particularly where there's a mass number of or a large number of structures impacted, is to have that consistency. So everyone is treated the same and treated fairly through the permitting process. We do encourage communities to potentially have some type of appeal process where maybe they ask for an appraisal and it gets consideration like Ray's suggesting, but consistency is really important. And one way to assure consistency in the market value is to use that assessor information, because that is what your taxes are based on, and that was done by the same individual or group of individuals, and it's consistent across the community.
Okay, thanks, Eric and Ray. So we don't really have that many other questions come in. We did have a few that came in that I think were answered directly back by our panelists, kind of some of the more specific ones, and also Dan did respond back to all of you with some other ones that came in. So just want to leave it out there for just a minute in case anybody else.
Something that popped into my mind, if you don't mind me interrupting.
Sure.
That is, I forgot to talk about how you get permit applications in Saginaw Township. On our website, Saginaw Township, or you could just Google Saginaw Township, Michigan, and you would go to find our website, go to community development, and then to building, and then documents. And our electrical, plumbing, mechanical, and building permit applications all available there. Saginaw Township Hall is open for business during normal business hours. We just ask that you wear a mask when you come in, and we can give you the applications there. We can email them to you if you give me your email address. We can even fax them to you if you still use that technology. It's my favorite, by the way. Anyway, so that's how you can get those applications. And I keep a few of them with me as I travel. So when I go through those flood damage areas, I've been handing out a few here and there as well. So contact me and we'll figure out a way to get you the applications and get that on-site meeting so we can get moving.
Okay, thanks.
And Jim, I want to make a pitch as long as we have people on the phone.
Okay.
One of the things I think we certainly can talk about is flood insurance. I talked a lot about disaster assistance. We didn't talk about flood insurance very much, but I want to let people know that FEMA has already paid out almost $18 million in flood insurance payments from this event alone. Flood insurance is always available, whether or not there's a disaster declaration, and is oftentimes the most substantial source of assistance to individuals that have a flood at their primary residence. It's a great tool that people should be accessing. Unfortunately, if you did not have it for this flood event, we would encourage you to consider it as a part of your overall planning effort to protect your primary asset, as well as any second homes or other property that you might have for which we can provide you with a flood insurance policy. You can visit our website at floodsmart.gov for more information and referral to agents in your area that can help you access this important tool. Again, it's been almost $18 million. The average payout so far is over $50,000 to individuals to provide assistance that will help them recover from this flood. So again, floodsmart.gov, and please consider that as a part of your planning effort for future events.
And Dan, if I could get in on that too, this is James Sink. I'm the Regional Flood Insurance Liaison for FEMA Region 5. Ray was talking earlier about substantial damage and some substantial improvement. One of the benefits of flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program is something called increased cost of compliance. If you were found to be substantially damaged as a result of the flood events, so at 50% or more of the value of your home, and you had flood insurance, you may be eligible for an additional $30,000 through your flood insurance policy to pay for the compliance activities Ray was talking about. So having to bring your home up to code can be burdensome, but the NFIP has $30,000 available to help you with that if you're eligible. And it really helps you build your home back in a way that is more resilient to future flood losses. So that's another benefit in addition to what Dan said that would come along with having flood insurance. If you do have flood insurance, make sure that you've filed a claim. Do not wait for litigation or any of those other things to be straightened out. File your claim today. There are strict timelines for filing your flood insurance claim, so the sooner you contact your insurer to do that, the better.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, take a couple more questions here. Will the 100-year floodplain be updated based on this event? I don't know if FEMA wants to take that, or Joy, or someone.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll at least make the initial answer. This is a question that we got previously that was in the chat box. So no final decisions have been made yet about any mapping efforts or new mapping efforts as a direct result of this event. As soon as a decision like that is made, FEMA will coordinate with the state and the jurisdictions. In the meantime, communities are required to enforce the currently effective flood map for the area, or a higher standard to address areas that flooded, excuse me, in particular for those areas outside of the identified special flood hazard area that were flooded by this event. So it's a long way of saying there have been no final decisions about new mapping efforts as of this point. We would encourage interested residents to talk to your local officials and make sure you're staying in touch with them to see what they're saying about this issue as well.
And when it comes to the state's Part 31 floodplain permitting, we are looking at high water marks from flooding in all 5 of our counties, and we're getting rainfall data to try to better define, especially in those unmapped areas, where that floodplain boundary is, so that we have so we can use this information to better help people going forward.
Okay. Is there a deadline for residents to apply for FEMA assistance in the 5 affected counties for this disaster?
There is. It's September 8th, 2020, which is 60 days from the date of the declaration, but we don't want people to wait anywhere near that long. We hope that people aren't waiting to clean up at their homes. So start that cleanup process, get registered with FEMA as soon as you can. Really, there's no benefit to waiting to the last minute. There's plenty of money to go around. We have plenty of capacity to serve survivors. So don't think that, well, you only have minor damage, so you're going to wait till later in the process when it's not as busy. FEMA has multiple call centers around the country, and we have staff that are available from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern time, as well as the website and our app, which are available 24/7 to serve people. In very, very limited circumstances, we can work with individuals that don't meet that deadline, but it's a very high burden to get over. So we want people to get registered now so we can start working with you now on your recovery.
Okay. Is there a way to get a waiver from the 50% damages of the home threshold for homes in the special hazard flood zone, either from FEMA or at the local level? Is there a way to get, okay, so I just repeated it twice. So, okay. Is there a way to get a waiver?
If that question is directed towards me, the only waiver you could get is just to file an appeal on that, because the appeal process is available.
Yeah. Okay. And I got a comment from looks like someone from Midland County, an official there, says please let them know that the FMV is required to be for the home only, cannot include property or landscaping. So and I think
Hey,
that
Jim, this is Jared Sanders with Eagle. I just want to jump in really quick. I wanted to kick a question to Joy or Brian to answer. It came up at last week's webinar. I think it's a really important question for people to hear, and that is, in this case, we know that there are some people that took emergency actions to stabilize their property, or they've already done work that may be regulated by our statutes or by soil erosion or by the locals, and have some concerns about, you know, what should I do now if I've already done that work? And I wonder if you guys might speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I can take that. So we understand that people had to act in certain circumstances. You know, the situation it is what it is, and sometimes you have to act to protect your property and your home. And the last thing we want is for any additional damage to occur. So if you found yourself in that situation, give me a call. We'll work with you to work your way through the process. You know, we've had a lot of experience dealing with this very similar projects out on the Great Lakes shoreline where that's just the situation requires immediate action. So we understand that that's occurred. We're going to work with you to help you through that as best we can.
All right, we'll take another question here. How do we appeal the value established? Who do we see and how to proceed?
Well, the first thing, is this in Saginaw Township? Can I qualify the question?
Yeah, it doesn't say. So
So
I guess you could assume it's in Saginaw Township.
Yeah, if it is in my jurisdiction, the first thing I would say is that we need to get together and discuss what the trouble is. And then if we can't make peace on a solution there, then we would have you fill an application to be heard by the Construction Board of Appeals. And then we would schedule that meeting and move forward. And if they rule in your favor, then we go that direction. If they don't, then we go the other direction. But so far, nobody's approached me about a challenge on substantial improvement declaration.
All right, this attendee, just to clarify that they're with the city of Midland. Okay. So they'd have to contact somebody with the city, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Well, folks, looks like we got to pretty much all the questions, either directly through the chat box or through our Q&A here tonight. I didn't know if any of you had any last, I guess we'll start to wrap it up then. So I don't know if any of our panelists have any remarks that you'd like to make before we start to close up.
Hey, so sorry to sound like a broken record, but please get registered for assistance. Call us, go online or download the app. Ask your neighbors if they've registered. Tell your friends to get registered. This is really something that we cannot stress enough. FEMA cannot provide assistance if you don't get registered with us. Again, if you didn't call us directly, visit our website or download our app to your phone, you didn't register for assistance. So please check with your friends and family and your neighbors. We don't want people waiting or thinking that, well, they're probably not eligible. This is a complicated process. We want people to call us, get registered, and we'll work with them directly to determine their eligibility. There's no cost to apply. There's no cost to receive assistance. And working with people that are trying to expedite it for you is not going to help. Call us directly and let us work with you directly to determine whether or not you're eligible, and let us help you get the assistance that you're eligible for. Thank you all for coming.
All right, thanks, Dan. And thanks to all our panelists tonight, Brian and Joy from Eagle, Ray from Saginaw Township, Dan, James, and Eric from FEMA for joining us. Just as some follow-up, I will be sending out an email probably tomorrow to everyone who attended, give you some follow-up information from the webinar in case you missed it or maybe didn't grab the stuff from the handouts tab. We'll also have a copy of the recording. We'll send out to everyone who registered. So even those people that signed up but didn't attend, you'll get a copy of the recording. We'll also post it on all the relevant websites and let you know where you'll be able to find that. And I guess that's it. So I want to thank you all for attending tonight. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. Thanks and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.